Rainforests. They breathe life into our planet, but defining their importance, that's nearly impossible. Still, on this episode, we dare to try. Coming up, we take you to Colombia, a country of jaw-dropping biodiversity, and also a place where those wonders are vanishing fast.
Tengo un hijo de 9 años y ¿qué va a ver en un futuro?
We sit down with Colombia's former Environment Minister, who pulls back the curtain on what's really happening in the Amazon and how it's tied to global crime.
A lot of the forest deforestation in the Amazon in Colombia has to do with money laundering, has to do with cocaine trading. We need more international cooperation in criminal investigation.
This isn't just their fight, it's all of ours. Just 2 degrees is on. Now,
they've cleared forests so huge it can fill major cities like Cardiff or Newcastle.
They say we share nearly 99% of our DNA with them. But beyond that fascinating fact, these primates are more than just our close cousins. Their way of life in the heart of tropical rainforests helps entire ecosystems thrive, introducing the incredible chimpanzee, not just an animal, but a vital player in the planet's story.
Dammi un bacio, Sugo! Dammi un bacio! Un altro, passerottina. Bella lei.
They're playful, clever, and eerily familiar. But beyond their human-like charm, chimpanzees play critical roles in keeping forests alive. You could even call them the gardeners of the jungle. Every time a chimp munches on fruit, they carry seeds through the forest, and their droppings become a natural planting machine, helping new trees grow and ecosystems regenerate. And when chimpanzees build nests, when they break branches and dig into the earth, they shape the forest in subtle ways. And the cool part, because they need large, healthy lands to survive, protecting these primates often means protecting everything else that lives here too. But a chimp's life isn't all rosy. In some cases, they've come into conflict with our communities. As their habitats shrink, they've been known to raid our crops and in rare cases, harm livestock or humans.
They always tend to throw stone at you because territorial protection is key to them. You know, just like humans, like I said, they are just like us humans. We are so much conscious of our boundaries.
The tug of war has led to diminishing numbers of chimpanzees, and the International Union for Conservation of Nature classifies them as endangered. Right now, there may be fewer than 300,000 left in the wild. That's not many for an animal we share so much with.
La situación c'est grave. On connaît déjà des autres chimpanzés aussi qui ont besoin d'être sauvés. Donc, si on ne fait rien, si on n'agit pas à protéger la forêt, bientôt ça sera vide.
And that takes us to one special chimpanzee which found itself stranded in a Colombian zoo after a fascinating life. This is Yoko, a chimp in his 30s which was kidnapped as an infant and raised by a drug lord. It was common for narco bosses like the infamous Pablo Escobar, for example, to keep exotic pets. Well, Yoko was taught to smoke and dress up in human clothes, which caused him to develop a skin disease and lose some of his fur. Experts feared it would be near impossible for him to adapt to life with other chimpanzees, but it didn't stop them from trying. Yoko's been flown out of Colombia to join others of his kind at the largest great ape sanctuary in Latin America at Sorocaba in the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo. And with Yoko's transfer in late March, Colombia became the first country to rid itself of entirely captive great apes.
Yoko desde bebé fue víctima de traficantes de animales que lo llevaron a manos de un narcotraficante que lo sometió a un proceso cruel y brutal de impronta. Yoko aprendió a tener comportamientos humanos, montar en bicicleta, llegó a fumar, se hizo adicto a la televisión, dibujaba, vivía vestido y ese proceso de impronta lo alejó de cualquier posibilidad de vivir en su hábitat natural. Por varias razones. Primero, porque Yoko quedó solo en Ucumarí y los chimpancés son una especie gregaria, sociable, ellos necesitan vivir con los de su especie. Segundo, porque es la oportunidad de que Colombia definitivamente quede libre de grandes simios en cautiverio. Entonces, por esta razón es una salida que no solamente busca darle a Yoko la posibilidad de vivir como chimpancé por primera vez, sino blindar la entrada de otros grandes simios y también de animales de otras especies exóticas a nuestro país.
Let's zoom in on Colombia, a country with growing relevance in the environmental arena. The country hosted the COP16 summit in late 2024. And as usual, there are mixed feelings about whether conferences like these bear any fruit. Colombia, a land of unparalleled biodiversity, where nature's tapestry weaves together ecosystems found nowhere else on Earth. But as the climate crisis intensifies, how is this nation balancing environmental stewardship with development? Despite its natural riches, Colombia faces significant environmental challenges. Deforestation, for one, driven by agriculture, illegal mining, and infrastructure expansion, has surged alarmingly. And authorities are still trying to figure out the consequences.
Tengo un hijo de 9 años y lo que más te da dolor es la impotencia, es ver que a causa de terratenientes que se apropian de terrenos como estos y siembran cosas que no tienen que sembrar, mi hijo que tiene 9 años, ¿qué va a ver en un futuro?
Yet Colombia is also at the forefront of global environmental diplomacy. It hosted the UN COP16 summit in 2024 and showcased its commitment to protecting biodiversity. And some strides were made towards achieving the 23 targets for 2030 outlined in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework.
Porque primera vez en todo el sistema de Naciones Unidas, en el sistema de lo que son los tratados multilaterales de medio ambiente, un convenio como es tan importante, el convenio sobre biodiversidad, establece un órgano subsidiario permanente sobre conocimientos tradicionales.
President Gustavo Petro has also promised to transition from fossil fuels to a green economy, emphasizing ecotourism, ecosystem conservation, and clean energy. And to prove it, he announced an $800 million project that he says will create regional energy integration.
Es decir, aquí no solo estamos hablando de solucionar unos problemas propios de Panamá y otros propios de Colombia a través de una línea eléctrica, sino que estamos hablando de soluciones reales y concretas para la humanidad, para el mundo.
But despite policy advancements, public opinion is divided. The surge in deforestation, forest fires, and environmental degradation has sparked criticism.
Esa visibilización política va a ser muy importante para el proceso de transición de esta crisis ambiental que el mundo está viviendo.
Lo que espero es de que los acuerdos que se hagan sean en base a la naturaleza, no en base a la economía. Porque ¿de qué me sirve tener dinero si no tengo un lugar donde vivir?
It's no doubt Colombia stands at a crossroads, embodying both the promise and complexities of climate action.
So it is adopted.
So I spoke with Susana Muhamad, Colombia's former Environment Minister, who also chaired the COP16 summit, about the role her country is playing as climate disasters worsen and as more Paris Accord deadlines draw near. So you recently closed the COP16 last year, which was a critical opportunity for Colombia to show leadership on biodiversity. But there's skepticism that it was more talk than action, which I can say happens after every conference. And the summit did not end as planned. What concrete, measurable outcomes, or maybe one or two of them you can mention, that came out of the conference for Colombia, and how can we be sure that promises won't be forgotten like past pledges?
Okay, so I will divide this into two parts. Remember that we started COP16 in Cali, and I will say that there were negotiation results, but there were also broader results. And I'd like to summarize both of those. In terms of broader results, we were able to attract 1 million visits to the Green Zone. And that was a big social mobilization. Remember, we positioned this as People's COP, and that meant that opening the political spaces where we are talking about the future of humanity to the social movements, to the public, is absolutely fundamental. And many times these UN negotiations are very closed. And I think this is one of the first times where actually the influence of social movements and different types of people, including private sector, where we actually passed from 1,000 companies in Montreal to 3,000 companies coming to Cali. It shows that biodiversity became a whole issue, a mobilization that needs to mobilize the whole of government and the whole of society. And I think that was a big, big success. Now, in terms of negotiation, in Cali, we were able to first create the subsidiary body for indigenous peoples and local communities. And this is very important because this is formalizing within the convention the direct participation of the people that are at the front lines of taking care of biodiversity. We also recognize the role of Afro-descendant communities in taking care of biodiversity. And when you start naming those communities that are at the forefront of taking care of biodiversity and recognizing them politically, that is very important. But also a very important outcome was the creation of the Cali Fund. And this was, I think, in terms of environmental conventions, a breakthrough. Because it's not about creating a fund. It was about making private sector that is using genetic resources that are in digital databases, and that right now, because they don't have to go to the countries to take the genetic resource, but these resources are in public digital databases, and they use those sequences of DNA to develop products and services and research. They don't pay anymore to the countries. So the decision at COP was that we created the Cali Fund so these companies can pay for taking care of biodiversity that they are profiting from. So actually we have created a new source of funding for biodiversity. It was not about only a vacuum fund, but actually a new source for biodiversity funding that is very much attached to be able to pay national biodiversity plans.
So let's just pause a second to elaborate on what the Cali Fund is. Its full name is a bit of a tongue twister. The Cali Fund for the Fair and Equitable Sharing of Benefits from the Use of Digital Sequence Information on Genetic Resources. All right, but in simple terms, it's a global fund designed to collect money from private pharmaceuticals, cosmetic, agriculture, and biotechnology companies that make profits using digital genetic data from plants, animals, and microbes. The idea is that if companies are benefiting from nature, then they should be giving something back to protect it.
I think it was a very successful COP. Now, just to finalize, where do we have some vacuum? Where do we need more action? And I think that's where we need all society mobilizing. Right now, there's very few countries, around 50 countries, that have submitted the national biodiversity plans according to the Montreal 23 Goals framework. And this needs to be solved because the national plans is the implementation tool. We have created financial strategies. We have created the Cali Fund. We have created the 23 goals internationally. We have given access to participation to indigenous peoples and local communities. But if we don't have national plans, then this will be all a very nice international process, but where is the action? The action happens at local level.
So you mentioned a lot about national plans. I mean, when we think about Colombia, we think about the Amazon. Of course, biodiversity, it is a hot spot for animal and plant life, but the Amazon is being destroyed at an amazingly alarming rate, and countries like Colombia have repeatedly called for international support. But after COP16, do you think the global community is actually willing to take responsibility for stopping the forces driving deforestation? Or are we just seeing more empty words? We just saw the UK, a report came out that imports from countries like Brazil, they've cleared forests so huge it can fill major cities like Cardiff or Newcastle. What do you think the role is for Colombia in stopping this type of importation or exports that use deforestation driving it?
Yes, it is a very important role, which is about being able to create economic alternatives that actually use the forest in a sustainable way and that can create added value products. Actually, the Colombian government signed an agreement with Kew Gardens to start working on bioeconomy and how can we use all that biodiversity in the Amazon and other regions in Colombia to create added value products, but that are based on community sustainable forest use. I think that's the most important aspect, that it would be more valuable to develop, to recreate the forest in an economic and community biodiverse process that actually to destroy the forest. We have worked in the north of the Amazon with 22 nucleus of forest conservation with communities, and it is starting to become a game changer in Colombia. Now, it is very difficult to sustain the effort, and that's where actually Colombia has called for international agreements, because it takes years, it takes at least 20 years to be able to be sustaining a process where actually you need a lot of public investment in the field. This is not about this issue that they say, oh no, the finance that is missing, we're going to bring it from the public sector, from the private sector. It's not happening if the private sector doesn't have the conditions to invest, it will not invest. So that we can attract private sector, you need a strong public investment. And it needs to be sustained, it needs to be reliable, and it needs to be in a sufficient time. And that's why we are lacking. And that's why, for example, this government has invested 2 years, very important resources for this program in the Amazon. Now, we are now facing fiscal crisis. So third and fourth year, we will not be able to invest the same. And then what will happen in the next 10 years, 20 years? How can we create that capacity? Yes, it is about international trade, but more than that, is about concessional resources that go for a common good of humanity. If the Amazon is able to be sustained, we have a base of investment that after that will create an economic process that creates value, then it could repay itself in a long term. But it cannot happen in very small projects as we have now. How do we create that financial capacity? And this is something that maybe the Cali Fund will start answering if we start getting a lot of these private resources from these companies. And then that part of that money can come to national biodiversity plans directly to the governments so that they invest and they can have a reliable source of funding in time. This is a principle where the Cali Fund can work. Now, we have another issue which needs international attention, and we are not very well coordinated, which is international crime. So a lot of the forest deforestation in the Amazon in Colombia has to do with money laundering, has to do with cocaine trading, also in Brazil, and also this illegal cattle. It is not productive change. We have almost like 5 million heads of cattle in the Colombian Amazon, and a lot of that is not really productive. It's like one cow per hectare. Why are we having this there? Because this is money laundering investment. This is not productive, and so we need more international cooperation in criminal investigation.
Let's talk about your successor for a bit, Minister Lena Jardina Estrada Anyon Kazi. I think I got that name. I think I butchered that name, but hopefully she'll forgive me. She now has the top job of continuing your environmental legacy, but with their political pressures, obviously, and economic interests, which often take priority. What do you think is to stop them from simply paying lip service to environmental protection while destruction in the Amazon and destruction of biodiversity continues? Do you think she can live up to the standards that you set before she came in?
Well, I mean, I will say that right now is the last year and a half of the government. So it's about closing successfully the work. And I hope that the new team has the energy and the commitment to actually tie up the work. You know, it was almost halfway through, and now it requires to be finalized. And that is a lot of administrative work internally in the government to make things happen. We have set in these 2 years and a half the structures, like the Fund for Life and Biodiversity, which was started by this government. It was created in Congress, it was designed, it was put into operation in the last 2 years and a half. It has created right now $300 million of investment in biodiversity in projects. It has structured around 10 billion pesos of projects and programs that have been approved. And we have now the vehicle to mobilize resources and implement on the field. And so all that very heavy work now needs to see the money landing in the field in these programs and projects, and the capacity of the fund to be able to sustain this effort for longer time. So
you're confident that Minister Anyokaza can balance the political realities that you've just outlined with Colombia's environmental progress?
Well, they must.
Have you spoken with Minister Anyokazi?
I have, of course.
What kind of advice did you give her?
Made the transition. No, I will not comment on her. That will not be fair.
But you're confident that she can continue protecting the country's biodiversity?
I hope so, and especially as she's coming from indigenous peoples are very empowered in this country, and also, of course, it's a top priority of President Petro. So it has all the conditions to be successful, and I hope they can use that opportunity.
Brazil will be hosting COP30 later this year, but the government of President Lula da Silva has come under fire because of his support of oil exploration near the mouth of the Amazon. Can you talk about the conflict of interest in terms of positioning yourself as a climate leader, but also finding it necessary to do what a country needs to progress economically? We know the wealthy countries, they've used oil and gas for centuries, decades and centuries to achieve the wealth that they have. Developing countries are still trying to catch up and still need to use oil and gas. Do you think that needs to be explained when it comes to Brazil, or do you think Brazil should be moving away completely from fossil fuels?
Well, we will have to see the situation of every country and their transition. I think something that has been underlooked is the countries that are dependent on the exports of fossil fuels, so the producers. And I understand, I don't know the numbers in Brazil, but actually planning the transition implies understanding what is your balance of reserves for your domestic consumption, how you make the transition, but also what is the balance of trade and the fiscal income that comes when you are an exporter country. And I can talk there about Colombia itself. And it has not been an easy equation. I mean, the Amazon should be one of those critical areas that should be defined globally as fossil fuel free territory. It should be a non-proliferation territory because of its importance for climate conservation and biodiversity. I mean, it is a no-brainer. Any exploitation and exploration is bringing closer the Amazon system into the tipping point. And that's a disaster for the whole of humanity. So
a disaster, indeed.
this adaptation to climate within the same economic rules and boundaries that we have set when the climate crisis was not here. And this requires a whole redefinition.
And that's our show. But with Colombia being the biodiversity powerhouse that it is, it's only appropriate that we end the show with its fauna. More specifically, these beautiful frogs that are in a so-called legal amphibian market, which a local reserve hopes will help put an end to trafficking. The La Reserva Biopark believes this type of farming is a practical and legal solution for the conservation of some endangered species. See you next time. Bye.